So we're going to break down, folks, the three main reasons as to why a large number of modern day conspiracy theorists have such convoluted, improbable, illogical, and wacky theories in order to try and explain what it is that we're seeing happening in the world with respect to human behavior. Okay, reason number one, let's get into this. Reason number one's a simple one, folks, and we all know this. The first reason why you get these conspiracy theorists, these modern day conspiracy theorists, spouting the illogical, fucking devoid of evidence conclusions that they come to is because of social media and the way that social media works. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, folks, we all know that the way the algorithms work nowadays, the algorithms are obviously not organic. They are manipulated. And there are certain topics on social media that get more traction than others. In other words, at any given point in time, there will always be a trendy or fashionable topic to talk about on social media. There will always be a topic that the algorithm is pushing in a certain way. And if content creators or conspiracy theorists were to lean into this particular topic, they are going to get more clicks, more views, more impressions, more subscriptions, more likes, etc. They're going to get more interaction on that piece of content. So, what will happen is you will get a trendy, fashionable topic. Charlie Kirk, for example. Charlie Kirk looks like he's just been assassinated in broad daylight on a university campus. Now, for me, the algorithm, I believe, was trying to place people into echo chambers. That is what all algorithms, I believe, are designed to do. To keep people in little bubbles that we call echo chambers, feeding them with information that doesn't challenge their worldview, but confirms it. And so these people, so long as they remain locked into this echo chamber, they are going to continue to build increasing amounts of distortion because they are refusing to allow new information in that would challenge what it is that they think about the world. So they just run with their pre-existing black and white worldview that they've developed, and they never seek a means to update that worldview. They are simply content with just taking the same information that supports what it is that they believe about the world. Okay, so when Charlie Kirk died, I believe that the algorithm was rewarding people who came up with the wackiest, most convoluted, most complex, most illogical, most irrational explanations as to why Charlie Kirk was killed and who killed him. So that's my opinion. I think the algorithm was rewarding people. The more elaborate the explanation, the greater the payoff that the content creator was going to receive in terms of post-interaction, interaction with the content, likes, subscriptions, impressions, you name it, views. And so what happens, folks? Humans are masters at pattern recognition. We all know this. We are all masters at recognizing patterns. So all of these content creators, what do you think they did? They analyzed the trends on their social platforms. They looked at what content was getting the most interaction. And so these people decided, well, I want some of that. I don't want to miss out on all of this engagement that other content creators are getting. Because I'm watching this content creator and this one and this one. They are posting a whole bunch of stuff about Charlie Kirk's assassination. And their theories are wacky and convoluted. But look how many views they're getting. Look how many shares they're getting. Look how many impressions they are getting. And so these content creators, these conspiracy folk, they spot the trend, and what do they start to do? They do the same thing because they're looking to compete with these other people who are managing to capture the attention, the time, and the energy of the people who are consuming the content. So in other words, what is it that I'm saying? The algorithms on social media create an incentive structure that actually incentivizes people to churn out bogus, convoluted, illogical content, because that content is getting rewarded by the algorithm. And it would take an extraordinary person to basically pull themselves away from these trends. It really would, because there's such an incentive. If you make your living on YouTube, you know, if your living is tied, or at least a part of it is tied to YouTube, and you're seeing that the conspiracy theory train, the conspiracy theory space, we could say, around Charlie Kirk's assassination is getting a fuck ton of likes and impressions and views, then you're going to be incentivized to produce similar content so that you can compete with these other channels and content creators that are currently getting all the time, energy, and attention of these consumers on social media. So that's reason number one, folks. Reason number one is that these conspiracy theorist folk are opportunists. They are opportunists. Think of them like some sort of an opportunistic animal out in nature. You know, the animal is always constantly on the hunt for trying to steal some other animal's food. You know, it's an opportunist. It doesn't really want to have to invest the necessary time and energy into creating content that, you know, is interesting to the creator, that's maybe interesting in a different way to a different audience that might be smaller but provides more value. No, they're not interested in that. Just like the opportunistic animal, it wants to acquire as many resources as possible with minimal energy investment. We're going to come to that later, energy investment. But that's what an opportunistic animal does. It basically wants the resources, in this case, calories, through the investment of minimal energy. The content creators are the same. You know, they are opportunistic. They're constantly looking what is trending on their social platform of choice. And like the opportunists that they are, they will mold and shape their content to suit the trend. They may not even be interested in the topic. This is what I noticed in the aftermath of the Charlie Kirk assassination. A whole bunch of people who normally don't talk about politics. Isn't that funny? A whole bunch of people who normally don't talk about politics. Perhaps they don't even talk about conspiracy stuff. But they were on the Charlie Kirk assassination train. They were in it. And they were churning out the content. This is not even the type of content that they normally talk about. But pattern recognition. They have the ability to recognize a pattern and a trend in social media, in the social media space, and because they are opportunists, they are more than happy to mold and shape their content to the most current trend so that they can capture the attention of the consumers who can't get enough of this content. Because whenever you have something like Charlie Kirk and an assassination, people's imaginations go wild. Their imaginations go wild. In the aftermath of an event like this, you have a certain window to cash in. You have a certain window to cash in on people's time, energy, and attention. And if you're not competing thoroughly with the other folk in the space, you're going to lose out. You're going to lose out on revenue, ultimately. Because those clicks, those impressions, those views, those subscriptions are all part of this monetized process. It's all part of the revenue stream. So that's reason number one, folks. That's not a revolutionary conclusion. You have people in the conspiracy space, and oftentimes you have people who don't even talk about conspiracy stuff, but they'll temporarily enter into the space in order to extract benefit from the most recent trend. And this is why you see the bizarre, illogical, convoluted theories that you see. These people aren't interested in you or I understanding from a logical probability standpoint what has happened. They're not interested in that at all. They are opportunists. All they want you and I to do is to click into their video, give them the view, maybe give them a subscription, give them the impression. That's all they're after. Because if they can get a shit ton of views on their content, as we all know, folks, if you see a video with 400,000, 500,000, 1 million views, regardless of the valuable nature of the content, the views and the likes and the impressions will lend credibility to that piece of content. Because the first thing people are going to think is, oh, well, if all these people watch this piece of content, then it must be valuable. Otherwise, why would all of these people have liked and watched the video? And so views and likes and impressions, all of this stuff is a way to give your piece of content credibility. If someone comes across a video of mine that has fucking 8 views, go look at the Rumble page. Like, my videos tend to get between 50 and 100 views. The live shows do a little bit better. They get maybe 200, 300 views. But anybody who's on Rumble and sees the Bandido, 200, 300 views on his live shows, they'll probably make the inference, well, he mustn't be talking about anything that's that valuable. Otherwise, he would have more views. That's the connection people draw. Now, this, obviously, it goes without saying, could be a mistake. Because you could have a channel that has a small number of views and subscribers, but the information could be extremely valuable. But that's not how people think. That's not how the average mind is thinking. They are looking for indications of credibility. And views and impressions and likes, that is all that most people need in order to assess if a piece of content is credible. And so these people in the conspiracy space, that's what they're after. They want their piece of content to generate the views, generate the interaction, so that it gains credibility. And then it's like a snowball running downhill. It's a little virtuous cycle for the content creator. The content creator mightn't even be passionate or interested in the subject. Remember, these people, a lot of these people in the conspiracy, alternative media space, they are opportunists. They're opportunists. They're just analyzing the trends. What's trendy? What's the algorithm throwing the direction of a whole bunch of people? What's getting rewarded by the algorithm? And these opportunists, whether they are actually interested in the topic or not, or whether they even have any valuable, honest, truthful insight to offer, it doesn't matter. They'll churn it out because they have an incentive. They have an incentive in order to do that, because they're getting rewarded by the algorithm, and if they can get more clicks, more views, more impressions, that's going to help their channel. That's the long and short of it. Okay, so that's reason number 1. Why you see so many of these bizarre theories floating around online. The bizarre theories, in my opinion, get propped up. They get rewarded by the algorithm. And if other humans, if other content creators using their pattern recognition can see other creators getting rewarded for propagating bogus, convoluted, illogical narratives around Charlie Kirk, then you're going to get a whole bunch of opportunists that are going to start doing the same thing because they want to compete. It's a competitive space. In order for them to compete, they have to sell a bit of their soul. Unfortunately for them, they have to sell a bit of their soul, like Lord Voldemort. If Lord Voldemort out of Harry Potter wants to have a Horcrux, he needs to split his soul and put it into some sort of an object. Some sort of a, object that's gonna house and protect this part of his soul. But he's splitting his soul. So the more he splits his soul, the less intact it becomes, the more volatile it becomes. That's what a whole bunch of these people do. They're not even interested in the truth, getting to the root of what's happened. They're just doing it for the superficial reason of clicks and impressions and views. Because they know that their competitors are doing it. And if they can see that their competitors are benefiting, they are going to want a bit of that smoke. They're not going to want their competitors here on YouTube or Rumble or fuck knows where else to outcompete them. So they're incentivized to do this. Okay. So, that's reason number 1. Reason number 2 as to why we get a whole bunch of people in this conspiracy space, disseminating a whole bunch of, let's be kind, improbable narratives surrounding Charlie Kirk and what happened. A second reason why people do this is because of status. Now hear me out. Status. We all know this, folks. If we think about this, this makes sense. Whenever you make a public prediction about something, We've all done it. One of the best examples would be sports. How many times, folks, has there been a fucking, let's pick the World Cup, because it's currently on. At the time of this show, I think England got beaten by Argentina in the semi-final. Argentina won, 2-1. Now, there would have been a whole bunch of people before this World Cup and during the World Cup making predictions about what was going to happen in the World Cup. Now, what happens when someone makes a really stupid prediction? They predict that someone's going to win a match and they get fucking tanked 4-0. They predict that someone's going to get out of their group, but they don't get out of the group. They predict that the match is going to go a certain way and it goes a completely different way. What happens, folks? Just use the world of sports as an example. What happens when someone gets a prediction really wrong? What do they lose? They lose status. What is status? Status is a gauge of your credibility, we could say. It's a gauge of how credible you are as a person. If you are very high status, you are very credible. You have a lot of power and influence. That's what your credibility gives you. This is why high status people are able to get access to a whole shit ton of opportunities. Because high status people have power and influence. What gives them this power and influence? Well, perceived credibility. They may be a piece of shit. They may be a terrible person. But if in the eyes of the public they are perceived as being a credible person, if they are perceived as having a tremendous reputation in their domain of expertise, then they're going to acquire more power and influence in both that domain of expertise and further afield. They are going to become more respected. What happens when you're more respected? I'm using all of these different terms here to get a point across. When you're more respected, when you have more credibility, when you have more status, you have more power and influence. Basically. Within your community, within your family, within your friend circles, within your business in which you're working, within the online social media space. The more status you have, the more credibility you have, the more respect you have, the more people want to listen to you, the more power and influence you have. So what happens, folks, if you start making a whole bunch of predictions, either in the world of sports, in the political world, the geopolitical space about what's going to happen with regards to this war and what decisions going to be made over here in this country, if you start making predictions publicly, and a whole bunch of your predictions start to be proved to be, let's just say, full of bogus nonsense. In other words, if you start to develop the reputation as someone who isn't able to accurately predict the future, what do you lose? You lose status, which means you lose credibility and respect. And when you lose credibility and respect, you lose power and influence over the people that once listened to you. So, what you will see, folks, whether it's in sports, politics, or any other domain of life, when you see people make public predictions, they are putting their credibility and their status on the line. They're putting their reputation on the line. That's what happens when you make a public prediction. This is why, folks, you see whenever you see someone on TV or on social media, this is why you see so many people hesitate. Because when they get asked, well, what do you think's going to happen? They say, well, this could happen and that might happen. And, it all depends. And the person asking the question's all like, no. You're giving me a political answer there. Tell me what you think is going to happen. And what normally happens, people don't want to give a prediction. People don't want to put their stake in the ground. Why? Because if they put their stake in the ground and it turns out that they were wrong, they lose status, which means they lose credibility and respect from their audience and from the wider world. And when you lose credibility and respect from the wider world and your audience, you lose power and influence over those people. So, let's bring this back to Charlie Kirk and all these conspiracy theorists. So last September, last October, what did a whole bunch of people do? When Charlie Kirk was assassinated, people made a whole bunch of predictions. They engaged in a whole bunch of different analyses as to what they thought happened, who they thought was responsible, and how it was carried out. This happened last year in September and October. So you had a whole bunch of people making predictions about, effectively, I'm saying predictions about what was going to happen, who was going to be found guilty, and interpretations about what happened. In other words, a whole bunch of people last year took their stake and they planted it in the ground. They planted it in the ground. Now, a significant passage of time has passed from last September and October until the present day. There were people talking about fucking Egyptian planes. You know who I'm talking about. You know, I don't really follow a whole bunch of Candace Owens, but she was talking about Egyptian planes. She's saying that Charlie Kirk seems to have had some significant impact in murdering her husband. She was talking about she was entering into the realm of physics, you know, interdimensional travel. It got a bit weird, is all I'm saying. Why am I saying this? I'm saying this because Candace Owens put her stake in the ground last year. She made it clear that she thought it was Israel. She thought that Israel had some significant, let's just say, influence into what happened to Charlie Kirk. She had all these theories about the Egyptian government, the French government, all in cahoots with the Israelis. And she had this idea that Charlie was turning, he was going to go against Israel. She was claiming that Tyler Robinson didn't assassinate him, that was all a whole bunch of bogus nonsense. In other words, whether you agree or disagree with Candace Owens, what you cannot disagree with is that she put her stake firmly in the ground. We would agree with that. She had a very strong, immovable position on what she thought happened to Charlie Kirk. Now, what happens, folks, whenever you put your stake firmly in the ground? Well, what you do is you tie your status, your credibility, and your reputation to that stake. That's what you do. So if it turns out that parts of your narrative start to fall apart, because your status, your reputation, and your credibility are tied to what it is, to your view of this particular event, in this case, Charlie Kirk, because all these things are tied to the stake that you've put in the ground, if the stake in the ground starts to crumble, then your status, your credibility, and your reputation is also going to start to crumble too. So what I'm saying is, a second reason as to why people continue to churn out these seemingly illogical, convoluted narratives surrounding Charlie Kirk is because their status is tied to the narrative that they first propagated last year. So you've basically got two decisions, folks, to make. You've got a fork in the road. People like Candace Owens, who put their stake firmly in the ground. It was Israel. It wasn't Tyler Robinson. It wasn't a gun. The bullet wasn't the bullet that they said it was. It might be an energy weapon. Interdimensional travel, energy weapons. And Charlie is a psychic. He predicted that this was going to happen to him. She's starting to talk about dreams. When you start to put that stake in the ground, you tie your status, your reputation, and your credibility to that worldview. So when a little bit of time passes, like let's say, 9 or 10 months, and across this span of time, a lot of the things, in this case that Candace Owens said, have turned out to be extremely improbable. People would say they have been debunked. And I can understand that. I'm going to use the term improbable. Last year, a whole bunch of people thought these things were very probable. But with the passage of time, the Egyptian planes and all this sort of stuff, it's looking increasingly unlikely that this is the accurate way to view Charlie Kirk's assassination. So whenever this happens, folks, whenever you put your stake in the ground and you tie your status and your credibility and your reputation to a prediction or an interpretation of a particular set of events in the world, you meet a fork in the road. A fork in the road, sorry. Because your previous narrative is starting to crumble. And when someone starts to observe their previous narrative crumbling, they then come to the fork in the road. So they have two options. Option one is they double down. So they double down. They basically say, no, I'm right. The fact that, this was suppressed, the fact that this evidence wasn't made available, the fact that someone tinkered with this thing over here only proves that I'm right. In other words, we're back into the scenario that I described with my friend. Not my friend, this dude that I met. I'm vaguely familiar with who he is. I wouldn't call him a friend. He's not a bad person, but he's someone I know, and he has some interesting views on the world. I talked about him at the beginning of the show. You know the dude who thinks that there are fucking aliens, non-human entities living in the moon, who are beaming out using advanced technology, these fucking energy beams to control human behavior here on Earth. That dude. What did that dude end up saying? Whenever I started to just ask him some gentle questions, what did he end up saying? Well, he said, well, the fact that there's no evidence that this is happening is evidence of the fact that there's a conspiracy and they are suppressing the information. Now I can't win. No matter what I say, he'll always just come back to the fact that the absence of evidence is actually evidence of the fact that he's right, because that's evidence of suppression of his evidence. This is what people will often do. Whenever they can see that their previous narrative, their previous prediction, their previous interpretation is starting to crumble, they can feel they are anticipating the status loss. They are anticipating the damage to their reputation. They are anticipating the loss of credibility. So what do some people do? They double down. And they basically then say, absence of evidence is evidence of the fact that I'm right, because that is evidence of suppression of my evidence. And this is what you're starting to see with a whole bunch of folk in the conspiracy space. As more time passes between Charlie Kirk's assassination, if you want to believe that, because there are people, as I said, some people think he's still alive, but let's just assume that it's an assassination. There are some people who made their predictions and their interpretations about Charlie Kirk's assassination. With the passage of time, about 10 months have now passed or so since the assassination, more or less. And, we've been able to verify some of the claims to a certain degree, and some of the things that, for example, Candace Owens said are looking increasingly improbable, increasingly unlikely. And she will be keenly aware of this, because, folks, you have evolved very sensitive status detection mechanisms in your psychology. We all know this. It's very important that you aren't losing status in an ancestral tribe, because if you're losing status in an ancestral tribe, you are losing the respect of your tribe members, you are losing credibility as a source of information, and your reputation is becoming increasingly tarnished. Now, if you, as an ancestral human in an ancestral tribe, continue to lose status through what it is that you're saying and what it is that you're doing, you run the risk of being kicked out of the tribe. If you become so low status, if you become so, if you become a person that's so lacking in admiration and respect from your peers, you might get kicked out of the village because you're bringing so little of value to the village, to the tribe, and so much potential cost and liability that the tribe may decide, fuck you, we're kicking you out. So folks, everyone in their psychology has very, very finely tuned status detection mechanisms, we could say. Status detection apparatus in your psychology. Everybody knows when they are the butt of a joke and they are losing status, unless you are fucking Asperger's or autistic, which most people aren't, most people know when they are the butt of a joke. What is a joke, folks? What is humor? In order for humor to be funny, someone must be losing status. That's what makes a joke funny. Someone or something must be losing status. That's what humor is. And we've all, folks, in our own lives been the butt of a joke. And what happens when you're the butt of a joke? You're losing status. And we all know what that feels like. Now imagine you're someone like Candace Owens, or one of these fucking conspiracy folk online, and you've made a whole bunch of videos about what you think happened last September to Charlie Kirk. And let's say across the last 10 months, it's turned out that some of your views on the event are looking increasingly unlikely and improbable. Well, you will be now anticipating status loss. And you have the same psychology and Stone Age brain as your ancestors. So the same little red flags and emergency sirens will be going off in your mind that went off in the minds of your ancestors whenever they were anticipating status loss. And when you realize how important status is to human affairs, the last thing anybody wants to do is lose a fuck ton of status, because that's going to mean you lose respect and admiration and credibility, and your reputation will be tarnished. And when all those things happen, or when all these things happen, what is the end result? You lose power and influence. You lose power and influence over your audience. So, that's the first thing people will do. Whenever they meet the fork in the road, when they're anticipating status loss, because they've made a whole bunch of wacky predictions about what happened to Charlie Kirk and who were the perpetrators, the first thing people will do is they will double down. They will double down. They will go down swinging. They've put their stake in the ground last year, and they're going to go down swinging. They are going to fight tooth and nail in order to prove that their original prediction or interpretation was correct. And that's what you're seeing from a whole bunch of people here. You're seeing a whole bunch of people defending their previously illogical position. Fair enough. What is the other option someone has when they are about to lose status because they've made a bad prediction or a bad interpretation of an event in the world? The second option that people have is to invoke their humility. We all know this, folks. When people get a prediction wrong, when people interpret something incorrectly, there are certain people in the population who use their humility to basically smooth over the incoming status loss. And this is very effective. How many times, folks, have we spoken with someone who has been wrong about something, who has done something wrong, has done something that they're not proud of, and they stand up and they basically say, you know what, I was wrong. I was wrong to do that, I was wrong to say that, I didn't do my homework, I didn't do my research, and going forward, I'm going to be more due diligent. You know, if someone admits to their error, if someone is able to hold their hands up, not blame anybody else, not create an excuse, if someone just stands up and says, you know what, I thought Israel was responsible for Charlie Kirk's death. That's what I thought initially. But I got swept up in the hullabaloo of, you know, all of the echo chambers online that the algorithm was trying to place me into. And now, 10 months later, I can pull myself away from it and hold my hands up and say, you know what, I got it wrong. Now, if someone does that, folks, will they lose status? Yeah, they're still going to lose some status because they made an inaccurate prediction or they had an inaccurate interpretation at the time of the event. So they will still lose status as a, you know, as a credible source of predicting and interpreting information in real time. But, you know what they will do? Where they may lose status for getting the interpretation wrong, they will gain status by demonstrating their humility. And this is something very interesting, folks. There's a good lesson in this. If you ever make a mistake in life, look, we all make mistakes, we all say things we shouldn't say, we all do things that we perhaps with hindsight wouldn't do. One of the best things you can do, folks, is When you say something that you shouldn't say to someone, or you do something that you shouldn't do, it's already done. It's already been said. The act has already been carried out. So you can't change the past. You can't go back in time. You can't change the past. You can't change what you've said. You can't change what you've done. So, you are going to lose a certain amount of status. You're going to lose a certain amount of credibility because of what you said and what you did. But even though that status loss is inevitable, what you can do is you can make the process of losing status more bearable. You can smooth over it a bit. And you know how you do this? You invoke your humility. So while you may be losing status here because you got a prediction or an interpretation of a world event incorrect, you might gain some status by demonstrating your humility, holding your hands up and saying, folks, I got it wrong. No excuses. It's on me. I didn't do my due diligence. I got stuck in an echo chamber. That's on me. When you invoke your humility, folks, you can't stop the status loss from your initial prediction or interpretation, in this case of what you thought about Charlie Kirk's assassination, but what you can do is you can gain status in a different way from your humility. So, folks, what am I trying to say here? What I'm trying to say is one of the main reasons, one of the key reasons that you see people online basically clinging to their previous conspiracy theory with respect to what happened to Charlie Kirk is because they are refusing to indulge their humility. They're going to go down swinging. Remember I said, whenever you're anticipating status loss, last year, a whole bunch of people, when Charlie Kirk was killed, assassinated, when that event happened, a whole bunch of people put their stakes in the ground. Energy weapons, Israel, fucking, some sort of exploding microphone. He was taken in underneath the stage, and then there was concrete put over the stage the next day to hide the fucking escape route. You had a whole bunch of people putting their stakes in the ground, making predictions. It wasn't Tyler Robinson. It was this person. People in maroon shirts. Look at this, the grainy footage here. This is AI. People put their stake in the ground. And a whole bunch of people were pointing the finger at Israel. And Israel had some role to play in this. Now, then we had the Egyptian planes. We had the fucking French government. We had a whole bunch of people who were supposedly involved in Charlie Kirk's assassination. But what is it that they have done? Whenever you make a prediction, folks, or an interpretation of an event at the time that the event takes place, you are putting your stake in the ground. In other words, you are going to tie your status, your credibility, and your reputation to that viewpoint. Now, when enough time passes, what can end up happening is certain aspects of your interpretation of what happened to Charlie Kirk in this case can start to fall apart because we get new information. 10 months have passed. Some of the theories now look incredibly unlikely, improbable, because we have new information. This is what happens, folks. When a big event happens, when you let enough time pass, new information comes in, and the new information can contradict the previous information and oftentimes debunk it, actually. It can make the previous information look incredibly unlikely. So what happens, folks, if you're someone like Candace Owens, who put your stake in the ground very early on, after Charlie Kirk was killed? Candace Owens went out and put her stake in the ground. Israel, energy weapons. It wasn't Tyler Robinson. It wasn't even a gun. It was an exploding microphone, perhaps. It was an energy weapon. Charlie was fucking a time traveler. The Egyptian planes, the French government. Urka Kirk. She's involved in the assassination of Charlie. These are a whole bunch of things that Candace Owens started to say in the first few months after Charlie Kirk's assassination. She put her stake in the ground. Now, with the benefit of hindsight, we can all see 10 months have now passed. And some of these things that Candace Owens, I'm just going to pick on Candace Owens here because she's a big high-profile podcaster. Some of these things that Candace Owens said, with the benefit of hindsight, we can now see, with more time passing and more new information coming into the equation, we can now see that some of these things lack credibility. They are looking incredibly improbable to be the absolute explanation as to what has happened. So Candace Owens, because she has a brain that evolved back 200,000 years ago in an ancestral tribe where status is extremely important, Candace Owens has the same psychology as her ancestors, and she has the same very sensitive status detection apparatus in her psychology. Candace Owens will know, subconsciously perhaps, that her initial take on Charlie Kirk is looking increasingly unlikely. It's on increasingly solid ground. It's on increasingly fragile ground. Increasingly, shaky foundations, let's just say. She will be aware of this. So she will be anticipating the status loss that's going to come with her initial prediction being incorrect. And so, we now come to the fork in the road. Candace Owens can decide to either double down and say that the lack of evidence is evidence of the fact that her conspiracy is true because the government is suppressing the evidence that she would otherwise have to convince you and I that what she initially said is true. This is how convoluted it gets, folks. So that's one way Candace could go, and that looks like the way she's going. It looks like she's doubling down. It's looking like she's not going to address the fact that there are certain aspects to her worldview surrounding Charlie Kirk that are looking very shaky. She's not going to address them, she's going to double down. Okay, that's one option that you can take when you are anticipating status loss. The other road that you can take is invoke your humility. This is what I do all the time. Personally, that's the option I take. You see, if I'm wrong about something, folks, there's nothing I can do about it. I can't change the past. So I am going to suffer the status loss with being wrong. So I need to be, analytical about this. I need to be clever about this. If I'm going to lose status, and that's an inevitability because I got an interpretation of a world event wrong, or I got a prediction wrong, then I need to look at how I can offset some of the status loss. And you know the best thing you can do? Hold your hands up and say you were wrong. And you'll at least gain some status. You'll gain some respect. You'll gain some credibility by at least holding your hands up, not making excuses and taking responsibility for the decision that you made X number of months ago, or for the conclusions that you generated X number of months ago. Okay, but this is why, folks, you see people doubling down. This is why you see people continuing to basically spew out these illogical conspiracy theories surrounding Charlie Kirk. Because their status is attached to these initial predictions and interpretations that they had of the initial event last September. And so what do? They double down. They know that there is an impending wave of status loss coming. And I think it's a mistake because they've already said what they've said. We can all assess the validity of what it is they've said. And instead of being humble, instead of invoking the humility, they're going to double down. And so what happens when you double down? Will you continue to spew out the same nonsense that you've been spewing for the last 10 months? And this is why you're seeing a lot of people in the conspiracy theory space continuing to churn out the same narrative that they were churning out 10 months ago, even though we have new information that suggests that some of these previous theories aren't as probable as we initially thought. But these people, because their status and reputation is now attached to their initial interpretation, they're going to go down with the ship. They're going to go down swinging. And so this is why you continue to see people propagating these theories. This is why these theories aren't going away, because these people need to be seen going down swinging with the ship. They know their status is inextricably entwined with their initial interpretation of Charlie Kirk's assassination. Okay, so that's reason number 2. Let's have a look at the third and final reason, folks. The third and final reason as to why you and I continue to see people propagating these illogical, convoluted theories about how the world works is because of their energy conservation mechanism. We talk about this on the show all the time. Folks, what did I say earlier about the opportunistic animal that wants to try and basically get calories with minimal energy investment? Folks, why is it that you think, why do you think animals steal prey from other animals? Why do they do this? Because it requires less energy to steal another animal's hard-earned calories than to go out and get those calories yourself. If you're a carnivore, the best existence that you could live is fucking stealing other carnivores' hard-earned calories. That's the best thing you could do. Why is that the best thing you can do? Because number 1, you get calories, yes, but number 2, you get those calories conserving more energy. If every carnivore could have their way, they would be an opportunistic scavenger. Of course you would. Because if you're able to steal other predators' calories, you never have to actually go out there and invest the enormous amount of energy that's required to capture prey of your own. The conspiracy folk are exactly the same. Folks, in order for you to rework your entire worldview, not only do you need humility, which was point number 2, but you also need to go against your energy conservation mechanism. If you had a previous worldview about, let's say, how you thought Charlie Kirk was assassinated, and it turns out that new information is increasingly telling you that your previous worldview might have a few too many inaccuracies, it's gonna take extra energy for you to now rework your worldview, start doing a whole bunch more research again in order to update what it is that you know about this circumstance. Folks, most people do not want to do this. If you are wrong about something in life, it is much easier to double down. This is why people double down. Yes, their status is attached to their interpretations of what happened to Charlie Kirk, but it's also a more energy conserving option to double down. Because when you double down, you don't have to do any more investigative work. You just spew out the same thing that you were spewing out 10 months ago. It doesn't require any extra conscious energetic input. You just have to use your memory. Oh, what did I say 10 months ago? Oh yeah, I'll just say that. It takes far more energy, folks, to basically sit on your stool and say, I was wrong, and I'm going to have to rework my worldview. I'm going to have to do more reading. I'm going to have to talk with more people. I'm going to have to work through my logic now. I'm going to have to do more reading. I'm going to have to do a shit ton more stuff in order to get to the root of what has happened here with Charlie Kirk. But in order to do investigative journalism, or in order to be a true, authentic, great investigator, you need to go against your energy conservation mechanism. Because your energy conservation mechanism wants you to choose the easiest route. If you've already got a pre-established worldview, it is far easier to conserve energy just going with that worldview instead of having to rework your entire worldview through a fuck ton more reading, listening, fucking interacting and talking with other people. That takes more effort, takes more energy, and it takes more time. It's far easier just to peddle the old narrative. Double down. Go down swinging with the ship. That conserves more energy. Doing it that way. And so, This is the third and final reason, in my opinion, as to why you see the conspiracy theory space still full of all these theories that don't really have a logical basis surrounding why Charlie Kirk died. Because it's too difficult, folks. It requires too much energy. It requires too much of an energetic input for you to have to rework your entire view of the world. You know, we've all been there, folks. You know, let's take a very recent example. The pandemic. The pandemic. Certain people at the beginning of the pandemic thought that this virus was extremely dangerous. They developed a worldview that said this virus could kill you and I. It could kill grandma, it could kill my brother, it could kill my little sister, etc., etc. There were a whole bunch of people thought this virus was deadly. And so what did they do? Double mask, fucking social distancing. They went to the hospital to get some stuff injected into themselves. Okay, so these people developed a certain worldview with respect to the pandemic. Now, just like Charlie Kirk or any major event in the world, folks, when enough time passed from the first lockdown, new information started to come in. And we all started to realize, nobody's really dropping dead from this. This is no more dangerous than the common flu or the common cold, really. And so as we start to get new information that this thing isn't as deadly as we once thought, we once again arrive at the fork in the road. Now, what did some people do? Some people doubled down. And to this very day, I will talk to people who still think that COVID was a deadly virus, and the only reason why it's no longer deadly is because there was a vaccine. There are people I talk to who still believe that. They still believe the initial narrative back in 2020. Even though we have got a fuck ton of more new information that not only tells us that COVID isn't even dangerous to most people. It's just like a flu. Yeah, if you're basically on a fucking, if you're a stage 4 cancer patient whose immune system has been fucking destroyed by chemotherapy and you're on death's door, then yeah, COVID might knock you over into the fucking realm of death. Fair enough. If you're a type 2 diabetic whose blood sugar is fucking all over the place and you've had both your legs amputated and you're about to have a heart attack, then yeah, you know, COVID might knock you over the edge into the realm of death. For most people in the population, this virus was going to have a negligible impact on their health and their overall life expectancy. That's for most people. Now, you were only going to be able to come to those conclusions when enough time passed. So by the time we get to 6 months, I mean, after 1 month, I've said this before on the show, after 1 month, I was like, fuck this. I'm going to see all the people that I would normally see. I'm just going to continue to live as I would normally live because I had enough evidence within a month. If this was a fucking deadly virus, you know, if this was truly deadly to young men like me, then I would be seeing a whole bunch of young men, my relevant others, I would be seeing relevant others, other young men dropping dead from this thing within a month. It's contagious. You know, it's highly contagious. Right. Well, I should be seeing people dropping dead. Did I see that after a month? No. That's called new information. And by the time we get to 6 months, or 12 months, or 2 years, fuck me, it's fairly obvious, folks, that the virus was not deadly to most people. It was deadly to a select few people. And those select few people are also at elevated risk of dying from the fucking flu. Right. Now, what happened though? People who thought that COVID was genuinely dangerous, and then once enough time passed, these people met the fork in the road. Do I invoke my humility and say I was wrong? Do I hold my hands up and say, I got stuck in an echo chamber. Social media put me in an echo chamber. The news put me in an echo chamber. That's on me. I've learned my lesson. I'm not going to make the same mistake again. Some people did do that. Fair enough. Other people, though, didn't do that. And to this day, 6 fucking years on, I still have people telling me that COVID was deadly and that I could have died and that I was lucky that I didn't die. And the only reason why I'm not dying right now is because so many people got vaccinated. Okay. What am I trying to say here? How does this relate to point 3, energy conservation? These people, whether it's Charlie Kirk and the theories that they conjured at the time of his assassination, or the pandemic, these people had a certain worldview. And in order for them to overturn that worldview, they would need to go against their energy conservation mechanism. Because when you have a worldview, when you've put your stake in the ground, and it turns out that your worldview is on shaky foundations, you're now going to have to update that worldview. You're going to have to allow new information in. How do you allow new information in? Well, you're going to have to start reading, listening to people, engaging in discussions with people in order to verify how solid your logic is. You're going to have to, in other words, invest extra energy into doing extra research and due diligence in order to re-educate yourself on the topic in question. Now, in order to do that, you need to invest the time and energy. And a whole bunch of people couldn't be arsed doing that. Because it's painful. It's painful to have to sit down and say, I got this wrong. I got this wrong. And now I'm going to have to go and do a whole bunch of extra research because clearly the research that I did previously wasn't correct. So now I'm going to have to go and dive into a whole bunch of new research that gives me new information so that I can update my worldview. Fuck. This is going to take a lot of time and energy. Most people couldn't be arsed with that. The energy conserving option is to simply peddle your previous narrative. Whether it's the pandemic, whether it's Charlie Kirk, or fuck knows what else. That's what a whole bunch of people will do. They will look at the energy and time that it's going to take to update now their new worldview. They'll look at that and say, I couldn't be arsed with that. No, couldn't be bothered. I'm just going to continue to spout what I was previously spouting because that's going to conserve more energy. Okay, so those are the 3 reasons, folks, why these conspiracy theorists continue to churn out the theories that seem to have a very improbable likelihood of being true. Reason number 1, they are opportunists that follow trends on social media. That's reason number 1. Reason number 2, their status is tied to their initial prediction or interpretation of said event. And number 3, they are conserving energy by peddling their previous narrative. In order to update your worldview, when you've got something wrong, you need to invest extra time and energy into acquiring the new information that's going to be necessary to update your worldview. Okay, so